Now I know some of you have your favourite Grail games that I'm not as big a fan of, but you know, different opinions and all that. I'm sure as responsible, mature adults we can just move on and get on with our lives and no one has to resort to doing anything crazy and stupid. What on earth is that? A real mature! And I don't feel radiation. So far I haven't felt any weird mutations in that. Well, other than what was already there anyway. Hi, I am Luke, the Broken Meeple, as I said, very quick at reconstruction. Not to mention self-resurrection. Jesus! And sorry for the delay in getting some of these reviews out. One, I've been quite busy. And two, what games? Seriously. March and April just dried up for decent game releases, I noticed. We got the odd one or two that I've done, but seriously, where are all the games? Oh, it's usually the same each year. Gen Con, Essen, and Christmas time, they're the times when all the games start coming out. However, some new really nice stuff has come out, both in expansions and in real game form, so you're going to see some more reviews over the next coming weeks.
Get on with it!
Yeah, today I'm looking at a little introduction first. Some of you might remember an old game called the Manhattan Project. It was a great little Euro worker placement game where you placed these workers out and you were building and testing nuclear bombs. You weren't using them on other people, but you were just basically building nukes, engaging in some counter-espionage, and generally the crux of the game in its sort of unique gimmick, that I think it might be the first one to do, I'm not sure, but whatever. It's the one that I remember fondly that does this, which is that you place your workers out, but they don't do anything until you take them back again. And the timing of when players will put them out and take them back always fluctuates. It's actually a similar thing that what happens in Energy Empire. Bit out of shot, but the one that's on the shelf, the other successor to this game, kind of like a brother to it. Similar sort of mechanic. Well, now we have a nice, big and chunky sequel to the Manhattan Project, 2 minutes to midnight. This is a direct sequel in terms of the timeline to the Manhattan Project, so it doesn't really have any bearing on Energy Empire. But this is a standalone game. It doesn't require you to have played the original game. You can play this without having any connection to the Manhattan Project. But those of you who have played it will instantly recognize the style of play, the artwork, the general theme. In 2 minutes to midnight, you're kind of on that cusp where all the nations are just really teetering on the brink of nuclear war. They've got nukes, they want to use them, they're a bit like self-paranoid about other nations, and it's just basically like 2 minutes to midnight. It's that doomsday clock moment. And the idea is that each of you will take control of a nation and you will be building buildings and hiring new workers. You start off with some laborers, but they can upgrade to politicians, spies, and military officers who can do different actions on the various boards. During the game, you will build submarines and bombers for aggression and defense as well. You will be building nukes via factories and reactors and such, researching different levels of tech. And as you go through the game, the idea is, well, funny enough, victory points.
Of course!
But the victory points will come from a set of pre-randomized stages during the game. You have 4 different ways of scoring. So you will score based on subs, for example. You'll score based on bombers. You'll score based on third world control. And you'll score based on, what's the 4th one? Oh god, I forgot the 4th one. Oh yes, silos with your nukes in. And you'll also score these again at the end of the game. The idea being, though, that you have a different order of how things will score every time you play. So the dynamic of the game will change, priorities will become different, and of course everybody has their own style of how they want to play. Do you focus on trying to get a balance of all 4 types of scoring in order to score a little bit each time? Or do you say, you know what, 1 or 2 of these I'm just not going to do very well with, but I'm going to completely power through those 1 and 2 other scoring tiles in order to, do better that way? And of course, at the end, one with the most victory points wins, and technically has control of the world's arsenal of nukes. Not exactly a prosperous place to be in. Now, one of the main gimmicks with this game is kind of what was in the predecessor to this, the worker placement itself. you have several ways that you can place your workers. On your own buildings, in certain cases on opponents' boards in order to use their buildings, more on that later, and a central board with lots of different actions like recruiting new labourers, upgrading your workers, doing political control, getting money, that sort of thing. And the idea is that when you place workers, you don't actually activate them. You just place them. They're ready. They're blocking spaces, but they don't do anything until you decide you want to retrieve the workers back. And then all their spaces activate in any order you choose. So you've got a lot of freedom about how to plan your retrieval term. When you do this, the round marker shifts up the board in order to, advance the game timer. So the more times you retrieve, the faster the game goes. And it's this style of worker placement that made me like the Manhattan Project, but also adore Energy Empire. It's that classic thing where the timing of when people get their stuff back differs. So you've got workers on the board and you're thinking, I really want to go to that education spot, but I can't because Muggins over there hasn't retrieved his workers. But if I can just do something else for a minute, if I just put 1 or 2 more workers out and just take my time, then eventually he's going to retrieve. In fact, he's going to do it next turn. So when he does, I'll be ready to take that spot that I really need. And it's a great little dynamic. It keeps the game fluid. People will say to me like, oh, I went last, that means I've got a disadvantage. Well, not really. You have the typical start with extra money or workers for going last, but then as soon as you get past that stage, there is no first, second, third player. It's just when do you put the workers down and when do you take them back? The order of play means next to nothing from the start of the game onwards because, well, you don't know when people are taking their workers back. It's entirely down to you. Component quality for 2 minutes to midnight is pretty solid. Minion games are really stepping up their game when it comes to their component quality. The original Manhattan Project was pretty decent quality. Energy Empire was really good. You had the custom dice, you had the thick tiles and nice vibrant artwork. It really looked good. This is no exception. The artwork is done in a style to look a bit like the old, shall we say, 1940s, 1950s style, situation of that Doomsday Clock era. You've got things that look like newspaper cuttings, you've got all the different little nuke tiles that are like these cool little yellow things with a radiation symbol on it. The boards look great. All the workers are these super thick little, cardboard tiles with the same artwork as you were used to before, with the faceless dude or something, with a little bit of hair and a mustache or something to say it's a different type of worker. But everything in here is just sound quality. Nothing in here feels cheap. No cubes. What? The nukes are little round things with radiation symbols on it. All your workers look different. The graphic design is pretty straightforward. And one thing I will give this credit for, you may take 1 game or so to learn the rules and get them all ingrained, because there's 1 or 2 things you might forget. But this goes out of its way to teach you those things. One particular rule about when you build a factory, you trigger these things. It reminds you not only in the rules, but also on the board you buy the building from, and then also on the scoreboard itself. There's a lot of these examples where there's these little tooltips across the place to remind you, remember, buy a factory, do this. Remember, when we score, also score these detonated test sites, for example. It's great that it gives you that little bit of a little nudge in the right direction to make certain you don't forget key rules. Of course, you may still forget key rules. The rulebook's pretty well laid out, but you might just miss 1 or 2 things in the text. I know I did in my first game where it's like, oh yeah, we're supposed to spend them to buy the... and so you come across 1 or 2 of these moments maybe in your first game or so, but eventually you'll start picking it up. And the worker placement itself is very straightforward. Put the guys out, there you go. It's just you need to know what everything does when you take the workers off, and for the most part, they're pretty straightforward as well. Straightforward actions, straightforward consequences. The only time it gets a little bit more fiddly and a little bit more complex is with the military actions, where you can do certain things like deploy your subs, deploy your bombers, send nukes overseas, and sweep for subs in your own little area. So that can get a little bit fiddly at first to remember exactly what they do and how you trigger them, but once you're done with that, you're kind of on your way to understanding the game. And as a nice little touch, I particularly like the way the spies work. In the original Manhattan Project, you had spies where you could put them on opponents' buildings and use their stuff and also block them. Here, it blocks them, but what I love is that when you put them on opponents' buildings and then retrieve them, the actions that you take are based on the tech level of the opponent. Wonderfully thematic, and it makes sense. It's like, oh, I've got a reactor here, but it barely produces like 1 nuke. My tech's not very good. Oh, you've got 5 tech level in their reactors, have you? Spy. Put it in their reactor, retrieve it, and suddenly some of their nukes are yours. And if you put it in their factory, you build a bomber or sub at their tech level, not yours. So it allows you to focus on certain aspects of the game, but not have to do everything, because you think, if I've got a spy or 2, and they're not difficult to get, you can put them on other opponents' boards and utilize their tech. Very thematic, very cool. It's a nice little twist, and definitely something you should not ignore, both on a defense and offensive level when you're playing this game. It can get quite mean at times though, because somebody will do a military action or a particular action, and they'll remove one of your spies. They'll shift control in the nation you're going for. They'll kill off some of your bombers or something. So you have to accept that there is a bit of take that, and you might just get picked on because you happen to be in their way. If you're not comfortable with that, you might get a little frustrated while playing this game. You must realize that you're being pretty aggressive in this. You know, it's not the levels of super heavy Euros where it's like super punishing in that, but you've got to accept that your plans may go awry, because at the end of the day, they're going to be defending themselves from you. So just because you've put a bunch of bombers in their airspace thinking, yeah, that's going to be a lot of points, well, they're going to get rid of those bombers. So you're going to have to accept that you may have just wasted your time, or, you know, you're being held back a bit. That's just normal for these sort of games. Now, it does have to be said that the game can go on a little bit long. The game box quotes about 2 hours for the game, and that's probably a bare minimum. You know, if you're very quick, and I mean super fast, you might do this in 90 minutes. But chances are you're going to be playing this game between 2 to 3 hours, because the idea is, especially with more players, although you can tweak the game, it gives you a normal, long, and epic length game, and all you do is basically shift when the scoring happens and extend the timer around the board. The only thing is that it goes on a fair while, because it takes a little while for your engines to get going, and then it kind of snowballs at the end. But as you're going through, you know, people can AP in this game like crazy because there's a lot of options, and if you do know any slow players, oh god, make them stay away from this game, because it will drive you insane. The turns should be pretty quick, and I have seen it happen, because the worker placement bit, if you know what you're planning to do, all you got to do is just go 1, 2. That's it, next person's turn. So you'll have these stages where the turns go reasonably quickly, but then it'll sort of grind to a halt every now and again because somebody needs to do a retrieval turn and they've got like 10 workers, and you've got to go, right, you did that, then I'll do that, I'll do this bit, right, there's some military actions, let's do this. So you get times where the turns go really quickly, and then you get like where the gears kind of get tight and stuck and lurch forward as, you know, somebody is doing retrievals, particularly if the 2 players before you, for example, are doing retrieval turns and you've only got worker placement to do, and it's like, come on, I'm kind of waiting. All right, 1, 2, well, that was worth waiting for, wasn't it? So it does have that kind of, you know, it's that sort of stop and lurch style to its gameplay. Not too bad though, particularly if you play with less players. You know, 2 players works fine, 3 is a good sweet spot, I think. 4 and 5, well, 4 is good. 5, no. I'm not playing this with 5 again. It's too much downtime. Just can't be dealing with it. You can tweak the length to make it more balanced, but it's still too much downtime with that many players. 4 I will play if people are used to this kind of game. 3 is a good sweet spot, just avoid the AP player. 2, pretty quick, super fast, still a decent game, you just vary the rules a little bit. Now you do have to be slightly careful with the tweaking the game length, because think about it. The round counter moves every time someone retrieves their workers. If there's only 2 or 3 of you retrieving workers, it takes a while before it reaches its end game. If there's 5 of you, lots of players are doing retrieval, so you don't feel like you've accomplished much, but the round timer is still ticking quite quickly. So I recommend that if you're going to play this with more players, you actually stomach it and play the long or the epic game variants, because that way you feel like you've got enough options, but because people are, you know, retrieving their workers more often, the game timer doesn't go too much longer, except for the slight downtime. That's the thing. The game length will generally be 2 to 3 hours, regardless of the number of players. It's just how much downtime do you want in between turns as you play. And for me, 3 players, the sweet spot yet again. So overall, aside from the sort of timing tweaks and the idea that you have to accept that the turns kind of lurch and the downtime aspect, I really like this game. I actually prefer this to the original Manhattan Project. There's more game here. I like the variable scoring. I like the theme. It's still strong. You know, everything sort of makes sense. You know, what you're doing with the nukes and how you make them and what the idea is of all these third world countries. You've got nation powers. You know, in the original game, you had to get that as a little expansion. Here, you can each be your own nation with a special ability, and some of them are a little dull. You know, oh, you get this little thing cheaper and you get a bit of money when you activate them, and whoopie-doo. But then you get some weird stuff like I think North Korea demanding money from other players so that they don't test their nukes. It's kind of cool, but there are some nice little gimmicky powers like that, and of course it's a variant, you don't have to use them. The rulebook advises you don't in your first game. Personally, they're not that difficult, throw them in, they're more fun. Player powers, what more do you want? So yeah, overall, I really like 2 Minutes to Midnight. It does have some flaws, I don't think it's perfect. It's going to have that niche playing level and the downtime can be quite high and it's a lengthy game. But overall, great worker placement aspect, good strong theme, variable scoring, variable player powers. You know, it's got a lot that's good about it. Do I prefer it to Energy Empire? That's a little bit, they're very different games. Even though they've got those similar themes, they're very different games. I think it's kind of on par with it. So overall, I think I'm giving this the same rating I give Energy Empire, and that's a solid, strong 8. Personal rating of 8. It's a decent game, not perfect, could use maybe a little bit of tweaking in the rules to just shorten it a bit, but overall, decent, solid, worker placement Euro game. It's kind of, I bet this is going to fly under the radar because I barely even heard of it before it came out, and I bet a lot of you out there didn't even realize this was coming. You know, it's like, what, 2 Minutes to Midnight, what is this? You know, so if you're a fan of the original, remember, you don't have to have played it, but if you're a fan, I think you'll like this. If you like worker placement games in general that have a little bit of a twist in the standard, put it out, wait for the round to end, clear them up again. If you want to break from that and something a bit more fluid, then pick this up as well. And if you just want the idea of the theme of just building lots of nukes and testing them and blowing them up and doing stuff, you know, cool stuff like that, then again, this game's for you. So that's it for me for this review. I'll see you next time. I've got plenty of stuff on the horizon, more reviews, and some of those lovely top 10 lists that you've been looking forward to. Thanks to you, everybody on YouTube and Patreon, for giving me some ideas of what to do. There are some really good ideas. In fact, let me give you a little spoiler warning. Next one is going to be top 10 old games. So top 10 games that are 20 years or older that have stood the test of time for me. There's going to be a top 10 games, top 10 turkeys, where, you know, these are games where I liked them before and they kind of weighed on me over the time. Why? You know, that'll be interesting. But what I'm really looking forward to is another great suggestion, top 10 games I hate to teach. This is kind of like kind of top 10 games I don't want to play with noobs in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way. But mainly these are games that I enjoy, but wish I didn't have to teach the game because they're complicated, convoluted, or I want to play with people who know what they're doing. You'll find out more when that comes out. And of course, there's more content from Board Game Approved. I've recently done a playthrough of Terra Mystica. I'm hoping to do playthroughs of games like Twilight Struggle and Among the Stars Beta, Terraforming Mars when that comes out. You know, there's plenty of great Steam games out there. You know, I want to try them out. So, that's it. See you next time. Take care, and try not to blow up the world before the next video. Okay? Cheers.